Welcome everyone to the third podcast on postdocs of Washington University in St. Louis. Today we will interview Dr. Aantaki. Details to her publications and web page are in the description of this video. So let's talk to her. Could you please tell us about your professional and educational background?
Yes. Professionally, okay, I don't know how to respond to this because I have a very diverse background. Currently, I am a postdoc in public health research. I did my PhD in health communication. So that's my current professional and academic background. I did my PhD in University of Florida in health communication, and I also did my master's in the same subject at University of Florida. However, if you go further, it becomes kind of chaotic because I did my undergrad. I'm from Bangladesh. I did my undergrad in electrical engineering. Didn't
Mhm.
find a job in there. So I used to part-time as a journalist when I was in college. So I started working full-time as a journalist. Then I became a sports reporter in Bangladesh. And then I thought, like, yeah, I feel stuck. So I'm going to get a degree in journalism. So I got my first master's in media studies from Ohio University. Worked in New York as a community reporter for 2 years. And then I moved to Florida for my research. And now I'm a full-fledged public health researcher.
That is fascinating. It sounds like you have a solid foundation.
I can see things from different perspectives. That's a very good point.
Yeah.
But in interviews, when you try to explain your background, it sometimes I feel like I lack commitment to fields, which is not the case, but
Yeah.
I have to really explain.
Yeah. So moving on to the next question, could you please explain your research in layman's terms?
First of all, I don't like the word layman. Nobody is like we do research for especially in public health or anyone who does research, do it for the public, right? And the first priority should be for the public to understand the outcomes of the research. They are the final intended audience. And I, I find the word layman a little negative. I know you didn't mean that, and it doesn't have any value judgment. It's my personal view. So for the public, yes, currently I am on a project which is focusing on how to communicate about epigenetics to people. So what epigenetics is, it's a very new emerging science. It's different from genetics, but it's under the field of genetic study, human genome study. But epigenetics is how your genes are influenced by the environment of your body and the outside space. Like whatever you do, wherever you live, that has an interaction effect on your genes. Certain genes get turned on or off. And that's what epigenetics is, like what is turning on and off based on what. So that's kind of the thing. However, my focus is on how do we talk about epigenetics, because like genetic therapy and genetic treatment, epigenetic therapy is becoming a thing in medicine. But we have learned from genetics that if you are not cautious about how you communicate about these things, you might perpetuate a lot of discriminatory, racist, sexist beliefs. And we have seen that in the eugenics movement in the 19th century, culminating in the Holocaust in Germany with the Second World War. So people think like, oh, if you have this genetic trait, you're supposed to be this, or if you're a woman, you're gonna be like that, or if you're not white, you're gonna be like that. You create value judgment about people and have these deterministic views about people. Same thing can happen with epigenetics, and we don't want that. So we want to prevent that, and that's why we're doing this precautionary study to make sure that when we talk about, like when doctors talk to their patients about epigenetics, or in public health sphere, when health communicators are talking about epigenetics, they do not perpetuate those kind of discriminatory, essentialist, deterministic beliefs that might end up in more racism, more sexism, more xenophobia, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. Thank you for breaking that down so clearly. Now I'm curious, what inspired you to focus on narrative medicine in your research?
Okay, so the story goes back to when I was New York City, and I was working as a community reporter, which didn't pay much. So I also worked as a translator for a medical malpractice law firm. Over there, like the reason I got that job is because I'm fluent in Bangla and Hindi, and they had a huge clientele who spoke that language. And it's a medical malpractice law firm. So all the clients that came, they had some kind of malpractice issue, like they suffered in their healthcare from might be a fault of the doctor or the system that they suffered had a worse medical outcome. So they wanted to sue them. And I translated their issues for them. And through that experience, I learned that so many of the issues could have been solved just by a cultural awareness or clear communication or linguistic skills on behalf of the hospital side. What I learned that, South Asians have a very different understanding what it means to be healthy or what is to take care of health. Like preventive healthcare is not a big thing in that part of the world because you have to pay out of pocket for healthcare. So you don't go to the doctor unless you're actually struggling with a health issue. So screening, regular checkup is not really a thing. And then you have a very different understanding of cancer, what is a good diet, what is a healthy lifestyle. However, those things, and it was back in 2015, those things were not taken in consideration on the doctor's side. So they gave them information based on a very Western, individualistic idea of health and healthcare. That created a lot of disconnect between the patient and the doctor. And I don't want to stress too much on the language barrier only, but it was a barrier too. Like, once a patient came and they said, like, oh, my doctor said they left tissue in my stomach after the surgery. So in my culture, tissue is what we call here toilet paper or kitchen towel. But in my country, in medical language, tissue is just like a bunch of cells. So they had that linguistic disconnect, or scientific literacy is different, which doesn't get considered. So I was talking to a mentor of mine from Bangladesh about these things, like, oh my God, this is just so straightforward to me. The solution is just to have better health communication or better training on the doctor's part, like training them for cultural sensitivity, training them to understand the patient, what they are saying. And then he told me that, you know what, you are talking exactly about something that my friend researches on. And this is called the field of translational science, health science. And I'll connect you to her. So I talked to his friend, and it was, I call it a match made in academic heaven. So like she and I, Dr. Krieger and I, like clicked immediately. She had done research in Bangladesh as well. And that's how I got into this whole narrative medicine. Like medicine is not just about physiological stuff that's going on in your body or your mental health stuff. It is also about how you communicate, how you tell people about illness, and how you react to a news about your illness. All those things. It's a whole person that you're treating. It's not just the shoulder pain that you're treating. And if you hyper focus on that one area, it eventually causes more problems than it solves.
Yeah, that is truly inspiring. Speaking of innovative approaches, you have explored the use of social media in health communication.
Mhm.
How do you see platforms like Instagram or YouTube changing the way we disseminate information?
Okay, like I said before, every health research or any research where our ultimate audience is the general public, general audience, we want to educate the people. It is for the people, for the betterment of all. So social media like Instagram, even TikTok or YouTube, they are great platforms to communicate science or health issues in regular language to everyone. We don't try to sound like pseudo intellectual like we sometimes do in journal articles, and we speak regular language to talk about things. And I don't know who said that, but the better you are at explaining something, that means you understand that well. So I really appreciate social media for disseminating information because this is really accessible to everyone who has internet connection, right? So anyone can approach it. It's most of it is not behind paid wall, like a lot of journal articles are, or even newspaper articles are. You have to pay or have subscription, and a lot of people might not have it, especially in the global south, where like here we can think, oh, $15 a month subscription, I can pay that, but $15 is a lot of money in many countries in the global south. people cannot afford that. But YouTube, you can go there. Instagram, you can go there. So there's a lot of positive side. But I don't want to be a tech deterministic. However, it is also very easy to disseminate misinformation through social media. So it is important to create that credibility or a collective awareness of how to identify credible information on social media for the public and help them to navigate some minefield, like you don't fall into the misinformation or disinformation phase, which we saw during COVID very vividly. But there were also good information about COVID on social media too.
Yeah.
So there are pros and cons. I think we are still working on figuring out how to address the cons and minimize the effect of those cons on social media. But in general, I do really appreciate social media for dissemination of information.
Yeah, it is interesting to hear about your perspective on digital landscape. And you just talk about COVID-19. In a similar vein, your work has addressed COVID-19 communication strategies. What lesson can we learn from the pandemic about effective health messaging?
Oh, I do not know how to answer that in one interview because it's I don't think anyone has figured it out. We just can learn from the mistakes we have uh, made, and so I think some of the things that are solid in science, some of the findings. One first thing is you cannot have a cookie cutter approach in communicating about any health issue because different people, given the context they live in, their socioeconomic background, educational background, cultural values, what they value more, their reality, depending on that, you need to tailor or customize the message to reach out to them. You cannot have a broad message
Yeah.
made for the default population, by which I mean, they say weird, Western, English speaking, white. There are some other things I forget. But you cannot have that and then like adapt it for other populations. You need from the get-go, you need to understand what people you're targeting or who are your intended audience and how to communicate an issue to them. So yeah, that's the first thing, like being very intentional about who you are communicating with. What age group, like the way you will communicate about the risk of COVID-19 to people in their 60s versus to people in their 20s who are like just going to college or just graduated from college will be very different, right? How do you motivate them to follow guidelines? Same reasons will not be applicable for the two groups. Or people who are fighting for their livelihood, they have to go out to work and to find livelihood for their family, find food for
Yeah.
their family. You'll communicate it very differently. Their priorities will be very different from people who can afford to live in their mansion-sized houses and isolate from everybody else because they have enough space and they don't have to worry about their next meal. So we need to be very intentional about who we are communicating with and why we are communicating with, right? And another thing we learned about COVID-19 is that what health outcome are you prioritizing right now? Because I don't want to be, I don't want to get into the political polarization of COVID-19, especially in the United States. There were some good points made by all sides, right? Like people isolating can also hamper their mental health, and that was a fact. I have interviewed people who were like elderly people who were isolated in their elderly homes, could not even communicate with their families, and that created a lot of like worse health outcomes for them. That is also a reality. However, there were also people who were irresponsible, who could isolate but didn't because of whatever reason, and went out and made other people who were already at risk sicker.
Yeah.
So both things are true, and like understanding that and acknowledging that before dismissing that, oh, that's just a political thing, or oh, that's just selfish, or whatever, like making value judgments without truly understanding the rationale behind a claim is important. So what health outcome we're looking for? Like, yes, we needed to contain COVID. At the cost of what? At the cost of risking people's mental health, other aspects of health. Like, what do we do? So those things also need to be considered. So those were
Yeah.
my two main takeaways when, I did research on COVID-19.
Those are valuable insights. Shifting gears a bit, could you explain about your vision of using virtual health assistant for cancer screening?
Yes. I did it specifically in the context of immigrant communities, especially immigrants from South Asia. So first of all, I need to tell this like how I approach research, especially health research. So historically, public health has been considered, oh, if you're doing public health, it is a good thing. It's not, because you might intend to do good things, but end up causing more harm. Because you are an outsider to a community, you're getting into that and thinking, oh, this will be good for you, instead of, you know, accepting the wisdom of the community and trying to understand like what is it that they need or they want, and trying to serve that. So that's how I approach research. So when I was doing it, but at the same time, the reality was I was in a lab that does cancer research. So my what I did was, okay, I want to see what is the cancer screening rate among South Asian immigrant populations in the United States. And I saw that compared to the general population, it is pretty low, especially in colorectal cancer screening. Immigrants have the second lowest cancer screening rate, only like except for like the lowest cancer screening rate was for people without health insurance, or yeah, people with no insurance. So
Yeah.
I that was something I saw, okay, this is happening. We have objective data about it. So I did some formative research to understand why is that happening? Why don't people get screened for colorectal cancer? Because colorectal cancer is one of those cancers that if you screen regularly when you're at the guideline, which is if you're 45 or above, if you screen for colorectal cancer and you get detection early on, it's a very preventable cancer, very well treatable cancer without any morbidity. Like you will not be in too much pain. It's cheaper. However, it's also a cancer. If you get it test, like get a positive test at a late stage, it can be horrible. You'll suffer. The mortality rate becomes very high, and the pain, all like emotional pain of seeing a family member or seeing yourself suffer through that is extreme. So I was curious, like, why aren't people doing that? So certain things I found that it's not a very well-known cancer in the South Asian community. A lot of people know about breast cancer, but not many people know about colon cancer. Not many people even know, like, what a colon is, because of like how we learned biology in our own language and we used different words. Not many people learn these things in English language. And then the more interesting part is people who know about colon cancer, even they don't get screened because, oh, it's embarrassing, like going for a colonoscopy, like I have to shove something up my butt, like I
Yeah.
don't want to be senseless and naked in front of people. It's embarrassing. And then in the community you don't talk about it because there is also a lot of stigma regarding cancer, a lot of like different beliefs about cancer. And then the final thing was, there are some ways you can screen for colon cancer without, getting a colonoscopy. You can do stool testing. Again,
Yeah.
I found another interesting part about stool testing, like, I don't want to do stool testing. I have to touch my own poop. It's disgusting. I don't want to do that. But you don't really have to touch anything. Like, it's a very hygienic
Yeah.
way, especially people from South Asia, like who have different ideas or values regarding what is hygiene. Like in Muslim population, if you are not clean, there is something called wudu, like you have to do that before you go for namaz. And if you are unclean, you cannot do that. So you have to clean yourself. So that's the stigma. And then that, like, there are other cultures who will be like, if you're not hygienic enough, you cannot even stay inside the same home with other people. Like there are so many things, and which are beautiful. Like those practices are good for your health. Like cleanliness is generally good for your health, right? So when you think that, oh, I'll have to touch a poop, like I understand, but I'm not trying to, otherize or stigmatize the culture. I
Yeah.
appreciate the culture. However, due to the lack of information about how to use a stool test, a kit, creates this problem barrier to get screened for colon cancer, because stool tests are quite easy. You can just get it mailed in your house. You can do your business in your own bathroom and mail it out to the lab. You don't really have to go anywhere. So you don't really have, if you don't have a car, that's okay. You're doing it at your home. If you don't, like if you're in an hourly job, you don't have to take sick days and lose your wage and go get screened for colon cancer, which is also a barrier for colonoscopy because a lot of people who live in rural areas or in areas where public transportation is not really well, which is most of the United States, you have to have a car to get to the hospital, but you don't have a car. Well, what do? You have to take a bus. It will take a day to get to the hospital. You have to fast the day before. You have to take somebody with you because you will be under anesthesia. You cannot go
Yeah.
back home on your own. So all those things are barriers for so many people that do not get addressed, but gets addressed with fit kit, with home stool tests.
Yeah.
Still the uptake was suboptimal, especially like also in South Asian immigrant population. So those were all the things I figured out with my formative research. So then I had to brainstorm like what can I do to address all these things with one intervention? Like what do I do? Like have the doctor talk to the patients? Well, I tried that, but doctors would say, we don't have enough time to talk to the patients about this. Like we get 5 minutes tops to talk to every patient in primary healthcare. And then another thing was South Asians do not go to the doctor for preventative care in general. So they're not going to really learn about it in general. However, if they're registered with a hospital, and what can happen, like once they turn 45, the doctors can send a link for education to the patients, right? So we tried initially, like, okay, let's say they send a link to the patients about you are under the guideline for colorectal cancer screening now. Here are some information about colorectal cancer, read them. But then there was a problem too that, okay, they get scared, like, oh my God, what does it mean by I'm under the guideline for colorectal cancer? Do I have it? And then some people would be like, it's boring. I don't want to read it. I'm not even going to click. So the click rate was really low. So that didn't work either. Finally, we thought, okay, maybe something interactive, something interesting will work. And that's when we went into virtual health assistants. Like the doctor will, once you turn 45, the doctor will send a link like, hey, you can, we call her Alex or him, them, Alex. And Alex, you can talk to Alex about a recent health thing about colorectal cancer, like just to learn about it, you can talk to them. And they will click that link and interact. And we saw like more interaction with the virtual health assistant. And what Alex does, she's a visual assistant. She talks about what colorectal cancer is, what risk factors are, she also asks individually, like, oh, do you eat beef or any kind of red meat? Do you smoke? All those questions, and kind of assesses how risk, what is your risk factor in terms of getting colorectal cancer. It also asks you, like, what are your barriers to get screened, like embarrassment, money, or time? And then, like, gives you options what you can do. Based on that, it will provide options like if you're at low to medium risk, you can do home stool testing. And then it actually demonstrates with video how you use that home stool test, where you see that you really don't have to touch the poop and it's really hygienic. So, and we conducted experiments and we saw like people took it very positively and their knowledge about colorectal cancer pre-interaction with the VHA improved post-interaction. So that's where like we got into using innovative healthcare, virtual health assistants.
Yeah.
It was a long-winded answer, but I wanted to make sure that it's not something ethically we thought like, oh, we heard of this fancy new innovation. Let's see how we can use it on people, because that's what a lot of Silicon Valley people do. Like they innovate really cool things and then
Yeah.
try to rationalize using it for the public, which is not always really good for the public. Yeah, that.
Yeah, that is a groundbreaking approach. So, considering its implementation, let's say like we do have a very robust virtual health assistant for
Mhm.
cancer screening, let's say. And what are the major challenges do you feel in implementing such a system in South Asian countries?
In South Asian countries, okay, I haven't done research in South Asian countries, but I am on a project on this with a Bangladeshi cancer researcher who actually introduced me to my PhD mentor. So he is in charge of the first public-private cancer center in Bangladesh, and we are trying to see if virtual health assistant would be a viable solution to improve cancer literacy in Bangladeshis and also educate people about screening options. Pros are that, everybody has a smartphone now, everybody has cellular connection, and people are very active on social media. So the access is not an issue. Barriers, however, is that like what language do you use? And if you go really into the granular aspects of it. Like Bangladesh is a very tiny country, still people have different accents. And a lot of linguistic research has shown like language is a huge primer of trust. If I speak the same languages as you, you will trust me more. Like it's just a heuristic thing that happens. So like, tailoring that to language, like who will they trust? Still in Bangladesh and at least like in all over the world, people trust face-to-face communication more and people trust in-group as they perceive what in-group is more. So I'm sending this virtual health assistant that they have never seen, they have no idea what it is, and would they even use it or trust it? Who should send out the virtual health assistant link for interaction? So trust is a huge issue. And in general, in South Asian countries, there is a lack of trust in the medical system because a lot of times people think like, oh, that doctor is asking me to get tested for this or get that test because, they'll get commission from the
Yeah.
diagnostic center, which truly happens. So how do you address those things? And finally, I don't know about India, but in Bangladesh, electronic health records is not a thing. Still, everything is done through paper and people lose things. So how do you keep track of who has screened for cancer and who hasn't? And how do you actually create that system where you can send out the link to the virtual health assistant for interaction to patients who are eligible for screening? And a lot of times, like people over the age of 45 or over the age of 65 might not have the same kind of, tech literacy as they have in Western countries. So understanding the tech literacy aspect of it, tech usage aspect of it is also very important. So it's a very nascent stage of implementing that in South Asian countries. But yeah, we have to be very ethical about it. Like if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. We cannot push an
Yeah.
innovation just because it's an innovation
Yeah.
or works in a Western country.
Yeah. Overcoming those obstacles seems crucial. On a related note, your research touches on mental health stigma in South Asian communities. What strategies have you found effective in addressing these issues?
Okay, I have tangentially studied mental health aspects amongst mental health in South Asian communities. So whatever I say, please take it with a grain of salt because I haven't really conducted research in it. Mine is like, okay, I have collaborated with someone or read someone's research. That's how much I know. So the first thing is, in my understanding, everything we know about mental health comes from very individualistic English speaking cultures. We don't know a lot about mental health and how to address them from collectivist cultures, which is prominent in South Asian countries. Like, and everything you measure, like, are you depressed or do you have anxiety? Everything is based on like kids going to affluent colleges in the United States and you test those measures on them and then validate them. Most of these measures have not been validated in different populations. Even in the United States, a lot of these scales of measurement don't work for elderly population, people with different literacy levels, or people with like African Americans, like how depression is faced by people who live in a very marginalized context of life. The depression scales don't really work. So that's the first thing. Like we need to conduct a lot of research in-house, like in South Asia. Like what does depression mean among South Asian people? And that can be very tricky because it like in general, people don't even think like depression is a thing, right? It's a
Yeah.
rich people problem. It's a Western problem. It's not an Indian problem. We don't have depression. It's a luxury to have. Um, or anxiety is a luxury to have. I remember still like when I was an undergrad, one of our professors said, like, depression is for sissies, like or rich kids. If you go to a slum and ask a kid who doesn't even know when his next meal is gonna come, if he has depression, he'll say, no, what is that? So that's kind of the cultural narrative about mental health. So acknowledging that and then trying to understand depression in the cultural context is extremely important. Creating measurements that are culturally and theoretically sound for
Yeah.
our culture is extremely important. The second thing is privacy, because the way HIPAA protects patients in the United States, it's not the same in South Asian countries. So privacy is a huge issue among patients, even people who acknowledge that mental health is an issue and I do need to see a therapist, they might not trust the therapist. Like whatever they talk about might not be private. Because, like, even in Bangladesh, I have this extreme example. There is this famous psychologist who primarily treats teenage girls or like young adult women, and he actually wrote a book about his patients. He changed the names, but the stories were very vivid and explicit. And people who knew those people, those kids, would probably know, like, okay, this is what she told to her doctor. So that's how unsafe it is to talk about or to explicit to what's the word to disclose your mental health information to a doctor because HIPAA is not a thing. So privacy is extremely important. Even people know, like when they know you're going to a therapist, that can be an issue. Like sometimes, young people, especially, they will go with their parents and neighbors will see, like we are very collectivist. We are always up on each other's business. Like
Yeah.
what are you doing? Where are you going? Which is good because people take care of you. And that's my next point. We need to utilize the built-in solutions to depression or any other mental health issues that we have in our culture. One of it, which is collectivism, because like, even here, I have American friends and I have friends from South Asian countries. When I'm sick, I'm more likely to call my South Asian friends because I know they're going to be more empathetic. They're going to understand like how much it took me to actually call somebody and ask for help, and they're going to be there for me. While my assumption would be an American friend will be like, they will be more like, oh, okay, this is not convenient for me. I have these inconveniences. Can I come tomorrow? Which might not be necessary for me at that time. So that understanding of a collective need or what need is like more up there in the hierarchy of needs in the collective sense, there is this understanding in our community. And like, if you are lonely and you're at home and you don't want to meet, here people will say like, okay, it's their boundary. I'm going to respect that. But in my country, people will poke you like, are you okay? It's okay. You don't have to talk to me. I'll just come over and I'll watch TV. You just do whatever you want to do. So that company, that social, closeness, that sense of belonging or being supported is built in our culture, and we need to respect that and preserve that. And I apologize that I was talking only about depression and anxiety in terms of mental health, but there are other mental health issues, right? Like schizophrenia
Yeah.
or bipolar disorder, which almost always need certain form of medication and treatment. And there we don't have that research in our country too, and how that medication will work, like, even can we trust the medication that is made in our country, like if it's made ethically or safely. Those are also things to consider. Are there standards to evaluate the safety of a medication, the effectiveness of a medication? And people are not just trying to profit off of making medications cheap and selling them as a solution to certain mental health issues. Those are also certain things that we need to think about.
Yeah. Those strategies sound promising. Now let's talk a bit about you personally. What activities do you enjoy in your free time outside of work?
Free time? What's that? Like, yeah, you're talking about myself at a podcast. That's something I enjoy. I'm enjoying doing. Okay, I like a lot of things. I think one thing I am an expert at is enjoying life. And so I love learning new things. I make sure, like, at least every month I learn something new in my life. It can be a new language, like as complicated as learning a new language, or as simple as, reading a new book that has a new topic in it that I have never read about. So that's what I do. I love photography. I love dancing. I love hanging out with my friends. I love watching Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon stuff. Um, yeah, I like watch movies, listen to music.
Yeah.
I'm very basic. Like,
Hmm.
oh, one thing I have started doing after moving to St. Louis was I'm it was so disappointing after moving to the United States at how inaccessible the public spaces are here if you don't have a car. The whole country is so car dependent. So after I moved to St. Louis, I found this group which is called St. Louis Urbanists, whose focus is to make the city more accessible via public transportation or for pedestrians and bicyclists.
Okay.
So I have joined that group and working talking about or understanding the barriers and facilitators about to making the space more walkable, making the city more walkable. That's something I truly believe in. I'm also kind of like politically active or at least conscious. Some not right now because it will cause my mind to blow. But yeah, I do try to be aware of what's going on and consume consciously, all those things.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
have a lot of hobbies. It's
Yeah, it's great to have hobbies. Finally, based on your personal experiences, what life advice would you give or would you like to share to our audience?
who are our audience? Other postdocs?
Postdocs, researchers, scientists.
Um, Thank you for doing the research that you do. It's really important, but please make sure that it reaches general public and reaches to the collective consciousness of the people. Do as much as you want. The second would be like I have learned it the hard way. Like when you are in academia, we get into our academic bubble. Like I see how I talk right now, like with anyone. It's so academic and pedantic. It's actually annoying. My family has told me so. I talk normally. What do you mean by I don't know the right source about it, but what I understand, that's I always try to cite what I have, like where I find some information. So it's annoying in normal conversation. So try to surround yourself with non-academic people and make sure that you're grounded. You're not living in your ivory tower of knowledge and research. That's very important because science is just one way of knowing things, not the only way. It's my favorite way, probably your favorite way too, but it's not the only way. Lived experience, anecdotes, collective wisdom of the society you live in, those are also ways of knowing. So respect that, try to at least. And then finally, I would say that I know we love research and it's very easy to get addicted to it, especially if you're curious, you're trying to solve a problem. It's just so easy to get into the weeds of it and forget everything else. But balance is my favorite word in everything about life. So um, not to be cliched, but yes, work-life
Yeah.
balance matters. So make sure you have a community. You have life outside of your research. You meet people, you talk to them, you take care of yourself physically, mentally, socially, financially. Like you do everything. Like your occupational health is just one aspect of your health. You have like so many other dimensions of health and make sure that those are taken care of.
Yeah.
Then you love your occupation even more.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that advice. It's been wonderful to hear about your journey and insights. Thank you for joining us today and sharing your experiences.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking interesting questions. It was my pleasure.